Good morning. Good morning. This is Valerie Leonard. I am the founder of nonprofit Utopia. I want to welcome you to today's webinar. We're going to be talking about succession planning for nonprofit organizations. And before we get started, I just want to tell you a little bit about nonprofit Utopia. We were founded about 18, 19 months ago, and we were here basically to focus on developing the next generation of leaders. We are an online community that is focused on developing the next generation of ethical nonprofit leaders. We've created a safe environment in which our members can innovate, they can speak candidly about issues or concerns that they face on a daily basis and share ideas and resources. And every month we have a different focus. For the month of January, we have been focusing on leadership, and this is our last discussion of leadership. For the month of January, we focused on reading Maxwell's book, The 21 Irrefutable Laws of Leadership. We shared our thoughts. We also developed our own leadership plans individually and shared other issues and concerns that we were having with our own leadership. And then coming February, we're going to take a deep dive into collaboration. And our mission is to develop the next generation of ethical nonprofit leaders. We provide ongoing professional development and networking. So we have meetups. We also have a number of classes and webinars, as well as coaching. And the overall goal of the community is to give our members the tools that they need to develop strong organizations while developing their own leadership potential with the goal of making a lasting impact. Our vision is to strengthen the global nonprofit sector by providing training and development opportunities for 50,000 emerging nonprofit leaders throughout the world by 2033. If you want to learn more about us, you can go to nonprofitutopia.com, or you can actually join us at nonprofitutopia.mn.co. And for those of you who are watching on YouTube Live, if you're watching on Facebook Live, you can join us right here in Crowdcast. And you can go to crowdcast.io/leadership succession planning for nonprofits. That is, if you want to, participate in the discussion here in Crowdcast. And we see Juan from Chicago has joined us. And Juan, we thank you so much for joining us. And if you have any questions or comments, please feel free to share them in the chat box. We have other guests who have joined us in Crowdcast. If you want, please share your name, where you're from, what you're hoping to get. And let me know too if you'd be interested in coming on the screen and having a conversation, sharing some of the challenges that you're having or some suggestions that you'd like to make. And for those of you on YouTube or Facebook Live, I will make an effort to answer any questions that you might have after this Crowdcast. But again, you can join us in crowdcast.io/lowercase e/leadership hyphen succession. And we're talking about leadership succession planning for nonprofits. A little bit about myself. As you may or may not know, I'm the founder of Nonprofit Utopia. And again, we're the ideal community for emerging nonprofit leaders. I have been working with nonprofit organizations for over the past 20 years or so. I've actually run a nonprofit from scratch. I have started a number of neighborhood collaborations, so I'm pretty well versed in nonprofit management. I teach a course at UIC, several courses at UIC in nonprofit management. When I say UIC, I'm talking about the University of Illinois in Chicago. And I also teach entrepreneurship for social ventures in Roosevelt University's Heller College of Management. I've got a Master of Management from Kellogg Graduate School of Management in Finance and Marketing, and my undergraduate degree is in economics from Spelman College. And this webinar is based not only on my experiences, but a number of the ideas I got are from the basics of nonprofit succession planning, and that was by Ali Sterling Philanthropy. So I encourage you very strongly to look up Ali Sterling Philanthropy. They focus primarily on fundraising, but they have a number of really good resources on other issues as they relate to nonprofit management. So all too often, when we talk about nonprofit sustainability or or succession planning, we really don't talk about, the changing of leadership. When we talk about sustainability, we talk about fundraising, we talk about revenue generation, and we pay very, very little attention to succession planning, except in passing. And then when we do talk about succession planning, we usually talk about it in silos. It's usually a separate conversation, and it's not usually strategic, and it's not usually around fundraising unless we're getting ready to lose one of our key fundraisers or key board members. Indeed, only about 27% of nonprofits participating in a recent BoardSource survey. They indicated that they had a written succession plan in place. So usually this is something we don't take as seriously as we should, and it's one of the most serious things that we can do if we want to make sure that our nonprofits are sustainable over the long term. And your organization is never too young to start thinking about succession planning. In an ideal sense, you want to start talking about succession planning the day you start your organization so that you're not left in a lurch, with service interruption in the event of an emergency or some unplanned transition. So today we're going to focus on ways nonprofits can prepare for leadership transition, and this could be as a result of unexpected departure of a board chairperson, or it could be expected, or it could be strategic. And then we're also going to be talking about some of the ways you can be strategic about these transitions. So we'll talk about the challenges as well as the strategies to ensure as seamless a transition as possible. So what exactly is succession planning? And succession planning can mean different things to different people. For our purposes, a succession plan is a nonprofit's outline for how they'll ensure leadership continuity in the event of a key change in personnel within the organization. So again, this could be a planned change, it could be unexpected change, it can be an emergency change, or it could be a strategic change. And in this plan, the nonprofit outlines how they're going to cover the necessary workload, pull together a team to ensure the success of a new leader. So they're actually doing the work as much as they can while this leader is planning to leave or after this leader has gone, but they're also putting systems in place so that they can work with the next leader. So given that the last of the baby boomers will be reaching retirement age within the next 10 years or so, or actually 10 years or less, it's very important that regardless of what your organization is, that you start think about preparing your organization for this massive exodus of talent and knowledge from the nonprofit sector. So why plan for succession? Again, you want to make sure that you have uninterrupted service. Sometimes your organizations can be built around a particular person or a particular personality, and when that person leaves, then other people within your organization might consider leaving. Other board members might consider not coming onto the board. Certain funders might consider not contributing because their relationship was with this person who is leaving. So you want to make sure that you are prepared for any of those changes um, that surround not only replacing the leadership, but replacing funds that could possibly leave upon that person's departure. And without developing a well thought out nonprofit succession plan, you often leave yourselves open to risk unnecessarily. So, if organizations aren't able to effectively bridge the knowledge gap after a key member departs, there's also the risk, again, of losing keyboard members, donors, and other resources, not to mention the knowledge vacuum. Every time someone who has made a significant contribution to your organization leaves, there's a knowledge vacuum, and you need to be able to be prepared for that knowledge vacuum and be able to fill it. So, how do these plans benefit nonprofits? If a nonprofit already has crafted a succession plan when a leader makes their departure, it's that much easier to make a smooth transition. So you think about, the relationships that this person might have. Think about how that person might help to transition those relationships so that they stay with the organization. And if they have relationships that will inevitably leave when they leave, then your succession planning needs to take into account how you're going to be able to replace those relationships, replace those revenue sources. And by spending the time to plan now, you'll be able to make the replacement, train their replacement, and if it's a good relationship, they will stick around with you and make sure that there's time to actually mentor that person on. And the last thing you want to do is do this succession planning, within a crisis mode, and you might not necessarily be able to have the luxury of making well thought out plans. You might not have the luxury of actually hiring the right person. So, as I talk, if there are any questions that you might have, please feel free to share them in the chat box, and I will be sure to address them here in the session. So, which roles actually need succession planning? While we tend to emphasize succession planning for the president of the board or the president of the organization or the executive director, you really need to have succession planning for every role that you have. So, every board member, there needs to be a description of the roles and responsibilities. There needs to be policies and procedures that they follow. You want to make sure everything is documented so that in the event that those people come up sick, if they resign abruptly, you'll have some roadmap to follow, and you're not just starting from scratch. The higher the level, the more planning that you need, and the more critical the role, uh, the more critical succession planning becomes. Now, don't make the mistake of assuming that because someone is an executive assistant or they have an entry level position that is not critical to think about succession planning where they're concerned. Again, every role requires succession planning, but every role may not require the same level of planning. It depends on the level of expertise, skill, and knowledge that is required of that particular position. And the most common roles that we hear about for succession planning, again, board chair, executive director, and the C suite. And when I say C suite, I'm talking about the chief executive officer, the chief operating officer, the chief financial officer, but never ever underestimate the importance of any person to the viability of an organization. I've seen administrative assistants take sick and the whole organization closes down because of this one person and how indispensable this person has been to the organization. So when we look at strategic leadership planning, that is your ideal succession planning. You are very strategic about this. Ideally, you would do this during a strategic planning process. And if you're not going through a strategic planning process per se, you still need to incorporate this strategic leadership transition planning along with any strategic management in which you might engage. And that is making sure that all of the resources in your organization are aligned with the strategic thrust of the organization. Every decision you make is in alignment with those strategic thrusts, goals, and objectives. So again, ideally, when you're doing a strategic plan, you're taking stock of the organization's strengths and weaknesses within the context of its environment. And you need to think about the types of leaders and the skills and capabilities that are going to be required in order to take the organization to the next level. In some cases, ideally, many of those people are already within your organization. It's up to you to develop a chart, chart their path so that they can get ongoing professional development so that they can assume those roles. And then in those instances where you know someone will be retiring soon, you need to start taking strategic steps as to how that person can gracefully transition out of that role while bringing on the next person. The next type of transition is the emergency transition, and that occurs usually as a result of an abrupt departure. There may have been a falling out with that person. There may be a sudden need to move. There may be a serious illness, anything that's unplanned. So you have to think ahead of time. Think of worst case scenarios. What would you happen if, for whatever reason, key players are not in their position tomorrow? The people who are in place today, tomorrow, what are you going to do if, I'm sorry, the people who are in place today, if for whatever reason they're not in place tomorrow, what happens? That could be something as simple as figuring out, well, what happens during the sick days? People take sick, 2 or 3 days off from the flu. What happens? Who takes on the responsibilities? Or does the work sit there until the person comes back? If the person goes on medical leave, unexpectedly, what happens? So whatever your planning process is, it needs to take into account who takes over into interim, to whom they report, what's to be accomplished, and what are the priorities. And then there is the planned departure. And, this could be, again, a retirement, a temporary sabbatical, maternity leave, paternity leave. And those are typically announced anywhere from 1 to 3 years in advance of the role being vacated. And again, this is very similar to the planning that you might do within the context of a strategic plan. So regardless of who leaves and regardless of who we're talking about, you need to understand and identify who everybody is within your organizations. What are their roles? What are their responsibilities? To whom do they report? And get a real good sense for how they align strategically with where the organization is going. So as you develop your nonprofit succession plan, one of the first things you need to do is understand the roles. You want to review the job descriptions and the past performance within those job descriptions. And then, given where the organization wants to go strategically, and given how the person has performed in the past, should the job description be modified? Sometimes people may not have performed to optimum levels because they were actually doing the work of two or three people. So you want to really assess the workload. You might consider doing a restructuring where that work is divvied amongst other people. If it was an instance where the person didn't perform because their skill levels didn't quite match, what was required, then you might consider revising the job description to make sure that you are attracting the skill level that's required. And you might have to also look at compensation and other ways to retain the top talent that you need in order to fill that slot. And there are many elements to the job that are presenting, challenges. And again, that could be changes in workload. It could be the fact that the organization is on a different path than they were when the person was hired who got that job, and the skills might change. And then when that person leaves, this is also a wonderful opportunity to start and reflect on what worked, what didn't work, figure out ways that this position can fit in more strategically with the rest of the organization. You want to get input from people from all throughout the organization. Look at people in the board and how this person may have interface with the board, get feedback from the board, and see how that might be able to be improved. You want to talk to the peers and see how the person, see what qualities they might look for in a colleague who might be performing that now vacant job. You want to also talk to people who may have reported to this person. Look at what they enjoy about working with this person, what they didn't enjoy so much about working with this person. It might be inherent in the person, or it may have been just inherent in the work that they do. But whatever you do, you want to make sure that you get feedback, 360. So you want to get feedback from people who are quote unquote superiors, people who are peers, and people who were direct reports, so that you get a real full picture of what actually happened in this position from various perspectives. But you also want to get a really good vision of the optimal position that this could actually evolve to become. And again, you want to not only assess that position, but this is a great opportunity to assess the capabilities of the whole organization. So you want to look at, particularly, especially you want to look at the leadership capabilities, look at their skills, look at their knowledge, look at their experiences, with your particular eye on the position that you're trying to fill, but you also want to look at where you want to go strategically. And at that point, you want to look at the capabilities of the organization, not just in terms of leadership, but you want to look at the organization in terms of human resources in general. Look at the impact in general. Look at the networking of that organization. Look at the financial management and performance of the organization. Look at the programs and really get a good feel for where that organization is, looking at the strengths, looking at the weaknesses, and then again, looking at that particular vacancy in terms of the strengths and weaknesses of the organization as a whole, and using this as an opportunity to shore up some of the weaknesses that are inherent in the organization, but then also positioning, using this hiring process as a way to position the organization for changes in the marketplace. So I want to welcome those of you who are just joining us. Please feel free, let us know your name and where you're from, and share with us some of the stories that you've had with leadership transition, and we will make sure that we can share them with the group. So you can post those stories in the chat room, And for those of you who are on Facebook and in YouTube, I will have a chance to look at your comments afterwards and then respond to you after the webinar. And then, as you conduct this organizational assessment and as you take stock of this person leaving and their experiences, so it's always good to have an exit interview, right? What else did you learn about other aspects of the organization, its capabilities? What did you learn about the department itself? And then again, what capabilities should you look for in the next hire? And don't forget about the processes. People are extremely important, but we want to make sure that as people leave and they take knowledge with them, there's still some knowledge left. There's still institutional memory left. So you want to make sure that you document every process. So this could be every program. You want to have policies and procedures for how the program should work. You want to make sure that there are flow charts for programs. This might be an opportunity for you to identify bottlenecks and streamline processes. You want to make sure that you document all of your processes from fundraising, your board positions, et cetera, et cetera. Again, so that when people leave, there's still some institutional history and knowledge that remains. I know sometimes we get so caught up in doing our work that we don't always take the time to document what it is that we do. And then when there's an emergency, we're kind of, up in arms, backtracking. All right. So make sure you document not only roles and responsibilities and job descriptions, but document processes, policies, and procedures. And again, transition is a good time to take stock of all your policies and procedures to see if they are still relevant. So make sure also, again, as I said before, baby boomers will be moving off the scene in the workforce over the next 10 years. And regardless of whether we're moving on or not, it's always good to groom new leaders within the organization. So as leaders retire, as they transition to other organizations, you want to make sure that the next rung of leaders within your organization is adequately prepared to make the transition. So you want to be intentional. Who within your organization is being groomed for leadership? How are you doing that? What skills do they have? What skills do they need so that they're ready to lead on day one? And where might they get that skill? Where might they get that exposure? What opportunities are there for mentoring? And then what types of assignments are you giving to not only increase their exposure, but increase their ability to lead? And then be flexible and allow for them to make mistakes, because the only way people can learn is by doing, and the only way that people can get good at what they're doing is to actually do it. And the only way you're going to build confidence in their leadership is to give new leaders the confidence in knowing that it's okay to fail. I mean, not to the point where they destroy the organization, but just give them comfort in knowing that it's okay to make mistakes. And then you want to maximize the success of your succession planning. So you can do that a number of ways. One way, if you have the resources, would be to hire expert consultants in strategic planning or human resources, leadership development, and those types of disciplines, organizational development disciplines. And then once you go through that process, if you can't afford to hire experts, make sure that you and your team, your leadership team, do the research that's necessary to uh, incorporate best practices for bringing new people on, right? So once you bring them on, you want to make sure that you have a strong, comprehensive onboarding process. The worst thing you can do is bring on a new leader and not necessarily let them have a clear understanding of what's expected. So you want to make sure that your new hires, regardless of what their positions are, you want to make sure that they understand what the strategic direction of the organization is. You want to understand how they fit in with making sure that the organization reaches its performance benchmarks and outcomes for programs. You want to make sure that that person is also understanding how what they do impacts positively or negatively upon the reputation of the organization or the bottom line of the organization, the relationships with other stakeholders within the community. And that takes time. It's not enough to do a 1 hour meeting, for an orientation and expect the person to really understand this, right? It's not an overnight thing. Onboarding should be done, gradually. You want to give people enough information to not only do their jobs, but you want them to have enough information so that they succeed. So that means helping them understand not only the technical aspects of the job, but understanding those intangibles, understanding the culture of the environment. And then you want to make sure, again, that there's alignment with that job and that person's responsibilities with the strategy of the organization. And you want to have a system, ideally, you want to have a system of performance management where you're looking not only at the performance of this person in his or her job and, as it relates to having the skills to actually do the job, but you want to make sure that this person has the tools to succeed and move the organization forward, within the scope of his or her job and meet those various performance management benchmarks. So this last slide, I got this from Ali Sterling Philanthropy. I think this is a really, really good outline of the succession planning process. And regardless of whether or not you're doing this strategically, whether it's an emergency, or if this is a planned departure, you're going to follow these steps. It's just a timeline within which you do it, and the strategic nature within which you do it is going to vary depending on what type of process it is. So regardless, you want to develop a succession plan, and in an ideal sense you're going to be doing this strategically, and you're going to be doing this planning about a year ahead, right? So a year before you need to hire anybody, you want to think about the organization, where it's going, what this person is going to be hired to do, and what skill sets that person is going to need. And then within the next 3 months, 3 to 6 months, you're actually going to be, writing the program, well, the job description, and then you're going to be recruiting that person. And then within the 18th to 21st month, you'll be conducting interviews. And then 3 months after that, you'll be onboarding that person. So the first 3 months of the hire, you'll be taking this person through the necessary activities to get them acclimated. All right, so that concludes, my little talk on nonprofit succession planning. If you have any questions, feel free to post them here in the chat room. If you want to share any of your experiences and you want me to bring you on camera, please post in the chat room. I can bring you on camera, and you can share some of your experiences. If you just want to chat and share some of your experiences, you can do that right now. I will give you a couple minutes, and if I don't hear from you within a couple minutes, then we will, end our conversation. I want to say thank you so much for joining us. I want to thank you for your time. I know it's not easy to take time from your work schedule, and I really would like you to consider joining nonprofit Utopia community. Again, we provide ongoing professional development. We spent this past month focusing on leadership and developing our own individual leadership plans. For the month of February, we're going to be focusing on collaboration and understanding the various levels of collaboration, the mechanisms you can put in place to protect yourself politically as well as legally as individuals and as organizations. Alrighty, so it doesn't look like we have any comments. Again, I want to say thank you so much for your time. And if you found this to be helpful at all, I encourage you to share this with your friends and colleagues. They might have something, they might find of interest as well. So, without further ado, I'm going to let you go. Take care of the rest of your day. Okay? Bye bye.